For those of you who don't know, this is the composite dash that has been in my car for a little over a year now. It's made out of a fleece material that was stretched over the factory dash. Then using epoxy and black paint, I was able to turn it into a shell of the factory dash that had been slightly modified. Really, the only thing I did to the factory dash was smooth it out just to get rid of any sort of complicated shapes to make it easier to pop the mold off. I then drilled 5 holes in it for my different gauges and a few different switches down at the bottom. It worked perfectly fine. It was a lot lighter than the factory dash. It was easier to take out than a factory dash. It wasn't the prettiest thing in the world, but it got the job done. I could have spent a bunch of time making it look perfect and beautiful and sanding and filling and all that. It just didn't matter to me that much. However, the biggest complaint I had about this dash, other than the fact that yes, it was a little ugly, was the gauges were too low, so I could not see them that well. The bottom 2 gauges had to be mounted upside down so I could actually see the full sweep of the needle, and even then I still had to angle them in the holes to help me see them better while I was on track. Other than that, it really got the job done. It was fine. But after looking at a few pictures of the interiors of some modern race cars, I got the idea to make a different type of dash that didn't follow the nice, smooth, flowing, curved lines of the factory dash, and was much more angular. So that's what we're going to be going over today, is the new dash that I put in the car, where I got my inspiration from, and what the final product turned out to be. Ever since I first made my composite dash, I have not been happy with it, specifically because I did not like the gauge placement. I really had no plans to change that out or fix that problem. I was just going to deal with it until I saw this video on Nismo TV. This is the interior of a Nissan 350Z GT500 race car, and as you can see, the interior is very different from both European and American race cars. The cage is completely different, the dash is completely different, even having all of the instrumentation on the steering wheel is very different from most other race cars. And I really like this dash. It's a very simple dash, it's very angular, it gives the driver a lot of visibility, and I was inspired at how simple it looked in all the flat shapes and how I could easily duplicate something very similar to that, whereas if I was doing something more like a Porsche dash where it looks very similar to the factory dash, that was going to be a lot more difficult to replicate. So as you can see, this one is very different from the dash that I had in the car and from the factory dash. It's the same basic concept of cover up everything that is ugly and put the gauges in the middle, but this one is so much more angular. So that front portion that covers the dash is perfectly horizontal. The portion that comes down to cover all the wiring is vertical, and then I've got the center gauge area angled at about a 30-degree angle towards me. The gauges are also mounted much higher, so they're about 6 inches higher total. So we accomplished the main goal of making everything easier for me to see. The secondary goal of I wanted it to look better has also been accomplished, or at least I believe it has. And goal number 3, which was not really a goal at all, but it was a nice little byproduct, is it's lighter. So it's about half the weight of that dash. This dash probably only weighs 2 pounds. So the dash saves me about 2 pounds on the front half of the car, so that's always a good thing. So everything for this dash came from one 4-foot by 8-foot piece of coroplast that I bought at Home Depot. You could get away with a 3-foot by 6-foot piece, I believe, but the larger piece is only a couple dollars more. The real difficulty is getting it home. I have a bunch of scrap left, which I have some ideas for a future video and what I'm going to do with that, but I use coroplast all over the car. It is the under tray, it is covering up part of the engine bay, it's covering up that little gap between the hood and the cowl, it's my dash, it's my battery box. It works really well. It's extremely light, it's really easy to work with, and it melts at 325 degrees. So nothing on your car except for your exhaust and your brake rotor should be at that temperature anyway, so it's really not going to cause a problem anywhere except for those 2 applications. The only thing I had to do with the coroplast to make it work for this dash was I had to paint that top section to keep the sun from reflecting into my eyes. I used this Rust-Oleum textured black paint. I wanted the wrinkle paint, but they didn't have it at Home Depot, and this worked just as well. So it gives it almost like a 200 grit sandpaper feel. So it really diffuses the light extremely well. So even if I've got one of my garage lights shining directly down onto the dash, it's not reflecting up in my eye. We'll see how it works. I'm gonna have to take it on a test drive, just drive it around the middle of the day and see what it's like. But I think it's gonna work really well. So here's the dash with my point of view from the race seat. You can see that I can see every single gauge extremely well, except for maybe that trans temp down at the bottom. but it has the same exact sweep as the oil temperature gauge on the top left, so I can reference the needle off of that. I know that anywhere in this region is about where I want to start to cut off. So if it starts to get to that 11 o'clock position, you know, I need to start paying attention to it a little bit more. I have an audible warning on all these gauges anyway, and a visual warning, so I'm not really that concerned about it. You can see the texture on the flat black paint. I think it's going to work really well. Worst case scenario, we can always flock the top of the dash if we have to. But I think it looks really nice. It covers everything up. I don't have to see any of the factory wiring behind here. It blends in really well. I like that this up here almost matches that perfectly. So it makes for a nice, clean, professional look. It covers all the way back to here. On the other side, just like before, I've got the fuse box in the back, and I've got the little diagram taped to it just in case I forget. We've got everything we need right here. Fan switch with the green and red, so I can easily remember that's on and that's off. Flashers, fuel door, and traction control. So everything is set up nicely. I also have my OBD2 port down here so I can put my scanner in or tune the car. So I'm really happy with it, especially considering we saved some weight. It was cheap, it was easy, it was a lot easier than making that other dash. Because really all you need to work with this is a box cutter and a screwdriver, because you don't really need to drill holes, you don't need to cut anything with anything more complicated than a razor blade. It's a super simple process. It turned out really well. I'm extremely happy with it. And hopefully the comments will be a little bit kinder to this one than the composite dash that admittedly was a little bit ugly. If you have any questions about how I made this dash, or you want to make one for your own car, just drop them in the comments below, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you guys next week.